It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday dinner, the roast still steaming on the table, glasses half full, the kind of scene people post online to prove their family is intact. Then she said it, my daughter-in-law, her voice sharp enough to split bone. "You're just a freeloader here." The word didn't echo. It landed heavy, final. My fork slipped against the plate. Across from me, my son, my only son, didn't flinch. He didn't defend me, didn't correct her. He just turned his eyes down into his wine glass, swirling the red as if it could swallow the moment whole. I stayed quiet, not out of weakness, but because silence in moments like that has more weight than shouting ever could. They thought my silence meant surrender. They thought I would keep swallowing every insult the way I had eaten the last few years of cold shoulders, whispered remarks, and closed doors in my own house. But they were wrong, and they will pay for mistaking my silence as weakness. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The room fell into that uncomfortable stillness, the kind where every sound feels like a betrayal, the scrape of a knife against porcelain, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking on the wall marking seconds that felt like judgments. I could feel the pulse in my temple, a slow, steady drum, but outwardly, I was still, my face impassive, as though I had heard nothing at all. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, shifted in her chair with a satisfied little smile, the kind of grin someone wears when they know they've struck where it hurts. My son, Daniel, finally lifted his eyes to meet mine for a brief moment. There was no apology there, no shame, just the hollow look of a man too tired or too cowardly to stand up for his father. That look cut deeper than Melissa's words ever could. I laid my fork down gently, the clink echoing across the table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low, calm, measured. No one moved as I pushed my chair back. I walked out onto the porch, the evening air cooler than I expected, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and cut grass. The cicadas were starting their nightly chorus, indifferent to the fracture that had just split open inside that dining room. Out there in the quiet, I pulled out the old silver pocket watch from my vest pocket. Its surface was scratched, worn from years of use, but still ticking steady as it always had. My father gave me that watch when I turned 18, told me to keep time, but don't let time keep you. I had carried it through the army, through late nights, working shifts I didn't want, through decades of sacrifice to keep a roof over my family's heads. And now here I was standing on that very porch of a house I had built with my own 2 hands and my life savings being called a freeloader in it. I thought back to the day Daniel first brought Melissa home. She had a sweetness then, or at least I thought she did. Bright eyes, polite words, quick to help with dishes. I remember telling myself, he's lucky, she'll take care of him. But small cracks show themselves quickly, if you know where to look. She started making little comments when she thought I couldn't hear, about the old recliner in the living room, about how I watched the news too loudly, about how the utility bills skyrocketed since I moved in. Each word wasn't much on its own, but strung together they made a noose. And Daniel, my boy, he was raised to know better, raised to respect his elders, to honor sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, maybe when he started climbing the ladder at work, when Melissa's influence grew stronger, he started to pull away. He still called me. Dad asked me to carve the turkey at Thanksgiving, but his eyes would wander when I spoke, and his silences stretched longer each year. I leaned against the porch rail, listening to the muted sounds of laughter from inside. They didn't wait for me. They kept eating as though I were nothing more than an empty chair. For a brief moment, I felt the sting of tears press at the corner of my eyes, not for myself, but for the boy. I raised the boy who once clung to my leg when he was scared of thunderstorms, who used to slip little notes into my lunchbox saying, "I love you, Dad." That boy was gone, replaced by a man who sat in silence while his wife gutted me with words. I closed the pocket watch with a snap. Time had run its course for my patience. When I stepped back inside, no one looked up. Melissa was laughing at something on her phone, and Daniel was chewing slowly, lost in thought. I walked past them, past the dining room, and down the hall to my study. The smell of paper, ink, and old leather greeted me, comforting in its familiarity. I sat down at the oak desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Deeds, bank statements, contracts, all of them bore my name. All of them proved that I was far from the freeloader she painted me to be. I ran a hand over the documents, my fingers tracing the embossed seals. My mind began to work slow and steady, like an engine long dormant sparking back to life. Melissa and Daniel thought they had the upper hand, thought I was just a shadow in their home, tolerated out of obligation. But the truth was different. The truth was power still sat quietly in my hands, waiting. The next morning, as the sun pushed through the curtains, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Lines carved deep into my face told stories of labor, of loss, of years carried heavy. But behind the weariness, I saw something else resolve. I thought of Melissa's smirk, Daniel's downcast eyes, and I felt a flame rekindle. They thought silence meant surrender. They had no idea that silence was just the first move. At breakfast, Daniel barely acknowledged me, scrolling through his phone, as Melissa rattled off plans about renovations, about finally making this place our own. She said it with that casual arrogance, as though the walls were already theirs to paint, the land theirs to mortgage. I sipped my coffee, let the bitterness sit on my tongue. I asked, "And how do you plan to afford all that?" Melissa glanced at Daniel, who shifted uncomfortably. She smiled, saccharine and sharp. "Oh, we'll figure it out. Daniel's already talking to the bank. We'll make it happen." I set the mug down. "Interesting," I said simply. Her smile faltered just a little. Daniel cleared his throat, muttered something about being late for work, and left the table. Melissa followed soon after, heels clicking like hammers against the floor. As the door shut, I leaned back in my chair. A seed of chaos had already been planted. They didn't know yet that the bank would come back to them empty-handed, because this house, this land, every brick of it was still mine. They thought me old, irrelevant, a burden. But I was about to remind them that a man doesn't spend 55 years building a life just to be erased by silence and disrespect. And so part one of my reckoning began, not with shouting, not with fists, but with the quiet gathering of truths. The kind of truths that, when revealed, bring entire facades crashing down. The pocket watch ticked steadily in my palm, long after Melissa and Daniel had left the house that morning. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the silence of the empty room pressing in. The words from the night before were still there, lodged under my skin like a splinter. Freeloader. I turned the word over in my mind, testing it against the years I had given, the sacrifices carved into my bones. If I were a freeloader, then what did that make of the mortgage payments I bled to cover when Daniel was laid off in his first year of marriage? What did that make of the house itself? Every board, every nail paid for with my sweat. Memory can be cruel. It never asks permission. As I sat there, the smell of the roast lingering faintly, I was pulled backward to the day Daniel was born. I remember the sterile hospital room, the squeak of nurses' shoes, and then the cry, thin, fierce, announcing life. I held him before his mother did, his tiny fist wrapped around my finger, and in that moment, I swore I would never let him go without. I worked double shifts, saved every dime, and put aside my comfort so he would have a better start. The years passed in a blur of baseball games, school projects, and late-night talks when he was too anxious to sleep. When he turned 18, I handed him the same pocket watch my father once pressed into my palm. He looked at it, his eyes wide with pride. "I'll make you proud, Dad," he'd said. I remember the warmth in my chest, the certainty that I had done right by him. That same watch sat in front of me now, ticking away as though mocking both of us. The flashback blurred with the present, and I found myself standing at the front window, watching the world move outside. A neighbor strolled by with their dog waving. I forced a smile, raising a hand, but inside I felt hollow. To them we probably looked like a perfect family. A nice house, a married son, a respectable daughter-in-law, a father growing old in peace. They didn't hear the words said behind closed doors. They didn't see the way my son looked away instead of looking at me. By mid-morning, I knew I couldn't just sit idle. I walked to my study, pulled out the folder again, and spread the papers across the desk. The deed, the trust account statements, the bank letters, they formed a silent chorus, reminding me of something important. My name wasn't erased yet. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded across my chest, and thought of Melissa's smile when she said, "Our home." She thought the ink on those papers meant nothing, because time had made me soft, irrelevant. That was her mistake. The phone buzzed on the desk. "Daniel." I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. His voice was careful, as though tiptoeing. "Dad, Melissa and I were thinking, maybe you could sign something, just a formality. It would help us with the bank." I let the silence stretch long enough for him to shift uncomfortably on the other end. "A formality," I repeated, tasting the word. "And what exactly am I formalizing, Daniel?" He sighed. "Look, Dad, it's just paperwork. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. We'd handle it." I closed my eyes. "And where would that leave me?" There was a pause. Then, in a softer tone, "With us, always with us." But the words were brittle, lacking conviction. He knew it, and so did I. "I'll think about it," I said flatly, and hung up. My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of realization. My son, the boy who once slipped notes in my lunchbox, was asking me to sign myself out of my own life. He didn't see it that way, but that's exactly what it was, a neat little signature, and I would become a guest in my own home, dependent on his mercy and her tolerance. I pushed the chair back and stood pacing the study. My mind raced in waves. Anger, sorrow, disbelief. Each emotion broke and receded, leaving behind a sharper edge of clarity. I thought of my late wife, her laughter in this very house, the way she'd brush flour off her hands while baking. What would she think if she saw this? If she saw the family we had built reduced to cold shoulders and whispered contempt? By noon, I knew I needed counsel, not from Daniel, not from Melissa, but from someone who remembered me as more than just a burden. I dialed an old number. Greg, a friend from my army days, now a lawyer. His voice came through steady, as always. "Long time, old man," he said. "Not long enough," I muttered, but my tone softened. "I need to ask you about property law." He listened as I laid it out: the house, the deed, the talk of banks, the insult at dinner. When I finished, there was a pause, then a quiet whistle. "They've got some nerve. They think I'll just fade away," I said. "Don't let them. The house is yours legally. If they're trying to mortgage it, they can't without your signature. You've got more leverage than you think." Leverage. The word lodged itself in my mind. I thanked him, promised to catch up properly soon, and hung up. For the rest of the afternoon, I found myself drifting between past and present. I sat in the living room, staring at the old recliner Melissa hated so much.